Hello, BookTube. I'm here to talk about a book that I read in January. Not a review, but just a little overview of it. My thoughts on. And it's Time of Hope by C.P. Snow. It was published in 1948 or 49. I always get this right. 1949 it was published. It is the first chronological book of a series called Strangers and Brothers by C.P. Snow, Charles Percy Snow, who was born in 1905 and died in 1980. He was a physical chemist. I guess his legacy is this series, but more so is an essay that he wrote called "The Two Cultures," and where he talked about the widening gulf between the scientific community and the literary community, and that caused controversy at the time. Other uh, academics weighed in. F.R. Leavis, even Aldous Huxley, I believe, weighed in on this. But it's still being debated today, and there are conferences that crop up every so often. But I'm not here to talk about the two cultures. I'm here to talk about Strangers and Brothers. It's a series of 11 books that he wrote between 1940 and 1970, I think, was the last published book. And as I say, they're interconnected because characters get introduced in one, are part of the story, but then they may get their own novel and more detail is talked about them. The relationship between Lewis Elliot, who's the main character, who it starts out in 1914. He's a teenager. His father becomes bankrupt. They sort of have financial difficulties. His mother dies. They move in with his aunt, and he has ambitions. He gets a legacy, but he wants to become a lawyer, so he needs a little more money. So there's a borrowing from an aunt, this aunt, for him to survive while he's reading for the bar. He's successful at this. And there are other characters that are introduced. As I say, one of them is George Passat, which gets his own novel, which is the second book chronologically, but the first book written. It's been retitled George Passat. The original title was Strangers and Brothers. And it also goes through his first love. He meets a woman and he's in love with her basically from the get-go. She has psychological issues, very deep psychological issues. He still loves her. He knows that this is going to be an issue for him. And we do know some things what's going to happen because it's mentioned in the first story, Time of Hope. So there's spoilers within the story already, but also because this was written, I think, the fourth book that he actually wrote. So if people were reading it as they were published, they already knew the fate of these two, or at least fate of Sheila, the woman that he loves. Um, and it's just, yeah, it's a wonderful story. It goes through the whole 20th century, about, it's about integrity, giving your word for things. He's very British in the stiff upper lip sense, um, but also for power, for gaining power and how you use power to live and how you deal with other people with that power in society or government. And it also deals with the Second World War, academia. So he does have his, going back a little bit to this two cultures, he has a scientific aspect to it that gets into the race for the bomb during the Second World War, and then also the literary side, which is the academic, the Cambridge side. And it's a series of books that I first came across, I guess it was in the early 1990s. I picked up one of the volumes. It was called The New Master, or The New Masters. And it was set in Cambridge. So I go, oh, yeah, this is just right up my alley. I loved it and realized, obviously, as I was reading it, that it was part of a series of books. So these were the old orange penguins that I assembled the whole set. And I spent, I think it was a reading week one year in February that I got enough food in, drink in, closed the curtains, locked the door, unplugged the phone when you had phones that plugged in, and hunkered down and read this series in one week. And I loved it. I thoroughly loved it. It was really difficult to put down. And since then, I've reread it 3 times. So I've read this. This will be actually the 5th time, 4th or 5th time. I'm sort of a little confused at how many times I read it, because I think one time I didn't actually get through the whole series again for various reasons. But for the most part, this is we'll say the 4th complete read through that I'm going to do this year. And I've mentioned it before that I'm going to be reading it one a month. And so I read Time of Hope in January. And again, I'm reading these in a chronological order, not the published order. When I first read it, I think I read them in the published order. But every time now that I reread it, I read it in the chronological order. Now, the next one that I'll be reading, or should have started actually yesterday, is George Passat. That's the one this is the first published book that was in 1940. And yeah, it's if anybody has read this, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. It has been compared to Dance to the Music of Time, which I am reading as well. Also one a month. There's 12 books in this series. They're shorter, but it's been compared. This is an omnibus of the first 3, and I've read the first 3 several times, and I never got through it. So I never continued. So I'm determined this time. So I am reading them slowly once a month. So that hopefully will be good for it. Hopefully I can sustain that. But yeah, so Strangers and Brothers, it's one of my favorite series of books, and it never fails to engage me in the stories, in the story, in the narrative. So yeah, if you've read it, or if you'd like to join in, then feel free. Do contact me via message, comments below, my email, or through Voxer. It's the same name as my channel here, ShawnDStandfast. And if you'd like to discuss the stories as we go along, that's perfectly fine. But anyway, I'll see you next time. Thank you, BookTube.